Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. In this episode, I talk to David Zaritsky of The Bond Experience, a channel you're probably familiar with if you're a James Bond fan. It's on YouTube, you'll know him on Instagram, but it's also a podcast. If you didn't know, there is a podcast that David Zaritsky runs, also called The Bond Experience, releasing episodes every now and then, just when the opportunity arises, a bit like my YouTube channel. I really enjoy it and recommend it, and I'm delighted to have him on this episode as we discuss the Britishness of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Oh, pretty early on, he mentions the mug I'm drinking from. You can see that mug over on www.albionneverdies.com. There won't be an outro for this episode, so I'm going to thank you already for listening. I leave the final word with David. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Okay. Recording in progress. David Zaritsky, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, it's great to be here, Thomas. I'm excited. I know that we've been looking forward to talking about this subject for some time.
Yes, I think I asked you about a year ago your advice on which are the most kind of British James Bond films, and this was, I think, the first one you mentioned. And I must admit, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, I've been trying to figure out the Britishness of this film ever since, and I thought, finally, go to the source. I'll ask you, what do you think?
Well, it's funny, too, because I didn't hear the whole thing, but I heard some of your conversation with Calvin, and I think the very natural Bond film to choose when you think Britishness is Skyfall. But I feel like Skyfall is the surface level choice, and I don't blame Calvin for it. I mean, there was so much focused on being in Britain, you know, and even, you know, some of the aspects of Britishness in there. And that was done quite on purpose, as you know, for the anniversary and, you know, with the Queen and everything. I mean, there was just even people over in the United States, as a Yank, I can speak from this point of view, I felt the Britishness that year in 2012. However, when I started really adding up all of the Britishness of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it won pretty handily.
Okay.
And there's several areas, and I kind of made my list to, I don't think we're debating it, but I mean, when I think about Britishness, I'm thinking about certain things more than just visceral or what we see or location. I'm thinking about Bond's identity, for example. I'm thinking about Bond's lifestyle, and in a very big way, and you've talked about this on your show, is his duty. You know, the whole idea that Bond is so deeply tied to duty and to British culture and institutions, much more than other entries. I mean, much more. And then the very name itself, I hate to go there, but just in the title itself, you talk about Bond's service to the monarchy.
Yeah.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service. You don't get, by the way, for those that can't see Thomas and I, he's drinking out of a Union Jack. Britishness.
I am.
What does it say?
A is for Albion. It's from my alphabet of Britishness. I bought my own mug.
That is the most British mug I've ever seen. You know, the most British mug is Thomas's face. But I'll say this. The whole idea that Bond is this royal agent through this all, carrying out on a mission, not just for MI6, but literally, he says it, for Queen and country. And the core conflict is Blofeld's extortion, right? It's this biological extortion plot, but the whole success of Bond on his mission, which I always go back to Bond and Bond's mission, no matter what, is around national security. It's around obligation. And that's a very British thing.
Yeah.
You know, I say this with great compliments. I find British people very dedicated to duty, very dedicated to the mission at hand. The mission at hand could be getting a good cup of coffee, but they're very focused and serious on it. And there's many mores, but I'll take a breath. I have a whole list of Britishness with this movie.
Okay, that's interesting. And you mentioned earlier that Calvin and I had addressed this, I think, in a sentence, that this film rests in some way on kind of snobbery. I mean, heraldry is essentially tied up with snobbery. I think a lot of people in the UK, if they look at their family histories, are kind of hoping to find something, you know, a castle here, a castle there. I've come across, you know, Americans who chart their family history, but not quite with that same angle.
Yes. All right, so I'll even get a little bit more controversial. Americans, I find, and I spend a lot of time with, like many of my best friends are British, and they would say the same thing and have told me. British, maybe it's the way they've been brought up, do have a more of a lean towards title,
Mm.
like even the title of somebody at work, a president at work or a vice president, like title and promotion are taken much more seriously than Americans. Celebrity is taken much more serious. Like, it's wonderful to have Bond girls at a Bond event, but for the American events, it hardly ever happens.
Mm.
They go for the social moment, the hug and the kiss and the connection with others. The regalness of things is very important to the British.
Yeah.
It's meaningless, almost meaningless. And I don't mean, again, I'm trying to set up the separation because as an American talking about these things, I am very attracted to and actually fascinated by these British institutions. And again, that's why I go back to this movie. When you watch Bond in this movie, in the MI6 headquarters, there's a procedural, very realistic mode. His interactions with M are very dry.
Mm.
There's a British formality. They're in suits. There's, as you said, references to heraldry, genealogy, an aristocratic like lineage. We don't
Yeah.
have discussions like that in America. This whole Bond uncovering Blofeld's title claim, who cares? Like,
Mm.
I feel like if this was, Jack Reese, the CIA or the FBI would be like, meh, so what? He's claiming something. But there is such a British institution with this. But then if you go back to Bond, and I find this with you, I find this with Calvin, I find this with some of my best friends that are British, there is this amazing reserve. And some people call it the British, how do they put it? It's funny, like an emotional restraint,
Mm.
not emotionless. I think a lot of people say, like, "Well, you can't get a rise out of a British person." Yeah, you can, trust me. But I think you have a very cool professionalism, this understated emotional expression. Like Americans, you see an American like me, and I'm a goofball, and I'll come running over to Thomas and I'll give him a big hug at an event. And it's not that Thomas doesn't hug back, but there's a wonderful traditional Britishness about it all, almost a sensibility. And I
Mm.
think Bond in this film has it. I think he's got this, what do you call it? Stiff upper lip
Mm.
on how he handles falling in love or facing danger or even experiencing loss. Whereas Americans might scream it out. There's a Britishness to it all.
Yeah. So, my wife's American, so she is a hugger, right? She will hug people
Yeah.
at an event where I might not initiate that. And then at another side, I know Arabs who've come to the UK and say they can easily find Brits who are friendly, but not close friends. Like, how do you cross that
Mm.
boundary between the politeness and then the friend quality? They found that difficult. Whereas many Russians I've known have found it quite easy to understand because there's the perception Russians are really cold. But a lot of them say, well, it's just rude to be kind of in your face. So they're like
Yes,
very, very warm with friends and then just give a bit of space to strangers.
totally. And it's not one way being wrong or the other. It is a cultural thing. And you're right. Norwegians, and I've been told this by my good friend Morton, who lives in Norway. Norwegians come off, excuse the pun, very cold at first. But once they get to know you, they are the warmest people. But they're
Mm.
not going to be warm right off the bat. It's almost like Americans like break a fourth wall. And it is unusual for a culture. I find the Swiss to be incredibly embracing, inclusive, and accepting of each other, but also other people. But you don't know that right away.
Mm.
And again, getting back to this film, it's funny. There was a part in this film where even Bond's romance with Tracy and his marriage, I think they're handled in this film with a certain sense of formality and
Mm.
decorum. There's like this, I've always told people there's this really understated charm. It's reminiscent of this whole 20th century British culture that I see in this film. but it also focuses on British manners. Like, this is the film. When I think British manners, like restraint and propriety, this is it. I mean, Bond, even how he interacts with Blofeld, he's not John McClane from Die
Mm,
Hard, trying to wrangle somebody and push him out of an elevator. There's a certain politeness,
yeah.
etiquette to it all, that I think is undeniable. And it's all these reasons. I just feel this Union Jack blanket of Britishness whenever I watch this film.
Do you think that might be influenced by George Lazenby not being British and having to kind of consider it as an outsider? There are a few kind of iconic British roles, like Elizabeth I was best played, I think, by Kate Blanchett, who is
Mm.
Australian as well. And Bridget Jones is an iconic British character, and she's played by an American. But again, that outside perspective suddenly creates extraordinarily British characters.
I think there's two things going, and I think you're right, but I think there's two things going for George here. And neither are going to sound like compliments, but trust me, it works out well for this movie. Number one, George Lazenby was not an actor.
Mm.
Because of that, it could almost say that there's a restrained sense to his acting. So he doesn't have this overtopness like some of the other Bond actors did in some cases. And therefore, he does come off as, I'm going to say it, that restrained British
Mm.
politeness. The second thing is because he wasn't an actor, he was puppet mastered. So the director could literally like fill him like an empty chalice and say, George, do this, move this way, act like this, say it like this, Mina bird it after what I've said. And because of that, you had a very British director
Mm.
infusing himself into the portrayal. Um,
Okay.
the other thing that George had going for him, I said two, but I'm going to add a third because I'm your guest. I can do this. Is, and I think you and Calvin maybe hinted to this. This film, out of all the films, and you'd be tough to argue against this, the film's tone is the closest to Fleming's novels, and certainly the novel on Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, it's Bond is less gadget laden. He's more grounded. He's more introspective. He's more professional. But the biggest thing that comes directly out of the novel and from Fleming himself is he is defined, not only following, but he's defined by duty and his identity as a British agent.
Mm.
That's what defines him first and foremost. And I think that is an incredibly British thing. I think that the British people that I've met are often defined by either their station, their title, happily what they do.
Mhm.
It's a little bit more of a definition of this. So, and I'm going to say this, and please, Thomas, I don't say this as I feel like I'm apologizing a lot during this podcast,
Which is an
but
incredibly British thing to
it
do.
is. I think you're rubbing off on me. But there's a certain kind of melancholiness to this film, that I think some British institutions embrace. There's a Fleming era like Britishness on screen, of course, but I think over time, as I've gotten to know people better, the British are a little bit. They're apologetic, as you said. There's a certain type of melancholy that is sometimes embraced as you can't you can't be too happy.
Yeah.
You need to. Well, there was somebody said it very well. They said the happiest moment is the unhappiest moment in a British person's life, which is so strange, but it's a little bit true in some cases.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, People have observed restraint in my character, that I tend not to get caught up in things or go crazy for things. Tend not to get too depressed either.
Exactly.
I hope.
Yeah. No, no, no. But that's the thing. I find British people, and even Bond in this, when there's joy, there's real joy.
Hmm.
Like, it's real joy. With, I think, some other cultures, and I'll even say Americans, like joy is put on.
Hmm.
It's you don't know a person. You meet somebody for the first time. You're like, hey, there they are. And it's like, you don't know me. How, why, and you so excited to see me?
I can think of one of my father's friends, an old army officer who went to the US some while ago, I think 70s, and encountered for the first time the "Have a nice day," and just immediately said, "No, thank you. I intend to spend my day with my wife."
See? But that's the other thing. There's this wonderfully self-deprecating, and I think I've adopted this not from British people, just being who I am, to the British culture, which
Mm,
again you find in this film. There's a part that I was thinking about in preparation for this podcast. Bond is in the Swiss Alps, which isn't Britain, but they somehow, through Bond, through his mannerisms, some of his fashion,
mm,
we can't forget the fashion aspect, his intelligence, his culture, his attitude towards risk and honor, they keep him grounded in British culture, even in the Swiss Alps.
mm.
So it's not like Bond becomes a part of his natural surroundings, geography, and culture. I mean, that is a Bond thing to do in other films where he tries to sort of quote unquote blend in, ignore You Only Live Twice, where he puts on fake eyelids and a wig. But I think that in this film, Bond forgoes all that. And he's
Mm.
very British, even in the Swiss Alps.
They do say there's nothing more British than a British person overseas.
Oh, tweed.
Yeah.
Yes. And that hat and the pipe smoking. My gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. He is what he is unapologetically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I
what do you
am
think? What are your thoughts? Because I mean, I'll talk about the ending of the film because I think it's the most British ending to a Bond film ever. But what do you think about the film overall? Was this teetering on one of your choices?
I said, I've been thinking about it ever since because I think snobbery, heraldry is such a thing. And, you know, I'm curious. Have you ever looked at your own history? Have you ever tried to see if there's some connection?
Not to royalty, but I've actually done like a background thing, and actually my daughter put together this wonderful background aspect on our family. We found out a lot about our family, but it was in an effort to find out about the story and the journey, as
Hmm.
opposed to finding out any kind of royalty or legacy or bigger celebrity moments. Um, I'll say that I've found a lot of people who are desperately trying to find that there's a connection to somebody important,
Hmm.
which in turn may raise their importance. But
Yeah.
that's never been a search of mine.
That kind of association. I mean, I have on my desk next to me, I have the family Bible. So this is from 1825, and it's got
Mm.
annotations throughout of different bits of family history. So I have it here. There's no connection between me and anyone, kind of highly important.
Keep looking. Keep looking, damn it.
We are all from Ireland, and it's all
Oh my
people who
God.
joined the British Army and went to India. So I found that it's so
It's
many different people.
it's amazing. I mean, yeah, I think there's so much commonality to what we have. That's people, and again, it's a British thing, is they're looking for that unique value proposition that they can hold on to, and a lot of that comes in the title. I
Mm,
actually think it comes in the culture, and this is to me, even like in some films where you see that, the British, the Union Jack and the flag and, Bond is back or talking to Margaret Thatcher, which can seem very British. But to me, this is the most British ending in the entire series because it's handled with this extraordinary, what I call British restraint.
mm,
And what I mean by that is only a few words are exchanged. I find that, and again, as you know me, Americans can be very verbose, but British, this was very understated, but it was very devastating. But there's this very quiet grief next to the stoicism of Bond, and to me, that is very British. There's this. I find you British people, very deeply reflective,
mm.
which I find a very powerful thing. Um, and even if you go back into British cinema, British cinema and even British literature has this reflectiveness, almost like every book, every film has to end with a lesson. There's something to look
Yeah.
inside of you. It can't just be like Ewoks dancing around and celebrating that, Darth Vader and the Empire are dead. There needs to be this moment where you look inside and think, how should I feel?
Mm,
What is the moment that I should be feeling? And I don't think I should be feeling too good. I mean, this is the most, I was going to say it's the most downer of a British Bond film. And then I
It
think about
was.
No Time to Die. Walk, 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 walk. Um, but I do feel like there is that one you just get mad at, but this one you get sad. Like you
Mm,
just think like, oh my gosh, what if my brand new love of my life,
yeah.
we went through this tragedy? What would I feel like after, by the way, being successful
Mm,
in all of my duty and obligations? So his big pull and lack of restraint that he showed, but it was because of duty for Queen and country, was successful. So he has this grandiose success. But you know what? In the British culture, you can't celebrate success.
no.
You don't celebrate success because whether it's yours or somebody else's, it has to be taken away quickly.
Mm.
And this film does that. It takes Bond's success and it rips it apart and leaves him with tragedy. And to me, that is very British.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And given my dad's army career, growing up, there were a lot of war films on the telly, and usually with family pointing out all of the errors. So I think I heard them with a soundtrack for the first time when I was an adult. But one significant theme was American war films end on triumph for the most part, not necessarily Saving Private Ryan, but for the most part. Whereas British war films, you could have a success, but you will follow the character who lost all his friends. Even in a
Exactly.
in a great battle that was a win, they'll focus on the sadness of it.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, you could really make a whole podcast of that cinematic, downer. It could be seen as a downer.
Hmm.
I think in some cultures, I think Americans would call it a downer. I see it in a different way of that it, the Britishness of, including this film, allows you to celebrate the moment, but understand that life is about the ups and downs, and that's
Hmm.
actually okay. Like life is not going to be this one unending celebratory moment. And you have to steady yourself for that. Like Churchill, like would tell people, kind of steady yourself for the fight, even when the fight's not at your doorstep,
Hmm.
because you've got to be ready for that. And I think that there's something wonderful about the British culture in accepting that and teaching it through their films. And this is, yeah, I mean, come on. Are you not convinced, Thomas?
I'm I'm pretty convinced. I have to present the one counter argument of an American film with an extraordinary ending, which I think is something we both connect on, The Empire Strikes Back. Like
Oh,
when the end credits hit, like what emotion do you feel? It's not one.
no, no. And that's a great point. It's not, I mean, that is one of my favorite films.
Mm,
Like seriously, like top 10 all films. And you're right. It is kind of a Britishness, of an ending.
yeah.
Um, but but it's so powerful too. And
Mm,
listen, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, you'd be hard pressed to find a Bond fan, no matter what culture, that doesn't find this film today a very powerful film.
mm.
And I think the power of it does sometimes lie in its Britishness. It really does.
Yeah, which is interesting that how a lot of British things that are successful globally really hammer down on the British identity of them, whether it's Downton Abbey or James Bond or whatever. Like it becomes the cultural identity becomes a selling point, essentially.
It's still, I'll tell you again, from my point of view, being on this side of the pond, it fascinates us because it is so different. I mean, look, we speak well, nearly the same language. We quote unquote look the same. We bleed the same blood, but yet there is something so wonderfully exotic and different about, accents and culture, how you embrace emotion, your stoicism, even in some of the things that you would deem as vices. I've had several British friends tell me that it is a very British thing for a British person to say something nice to your face and then turn around and roll their eyes. And
Yes.
Americans will look at you and call you an asshole
Mm,
and just think nothing of it. Like they
mhm.
would just tell you to your face. Now, you could see that as, well, gosh, I'd much rather have somebody tell it to your face. But would you? As I get older, life is really good with the blissfulness of not knowing what everybody's thinking about you. Because if you could hear everybody's thoughts, you would
Mm.
have the most depressing life in the world. So I don't think that, the Britishness that people see as vices are really vices. I just think it's a wonderful cultural moment that the British have cultivated since the beginning of the empire.
Fair enough. And even today, with international students coming to UK universities, right? UK universities are very dependent on students coming from all over the world. And it's fairly common for language centers to have like big charts of Britishness to general English translations. Like, that's a really interesting idea, means you're wrong. Or I'll think about that. I will never think about that ever again.
By the
So
way, we Americans need that still. I need that for my British friends. I probably am not reading all the tea leaves, nor do I want to. But yeah, good point.
there's an American comedian called Reginald D. Hunter, and he's lived in the UK for a very long time. So he occasionally appears on British chat shows, things like that.
Yeah.
And he commented that when he first arrived, he thought he was having a nice day. And then he got home and he was doing the hoovering and suddenly, hang on, there was subtext to that. That
Hoovering.
interaction.
What's
Uh,
hoovering?
Vacuum cleaning.
But see, there you go. There is a language barrier.
There's a language barrier. It's one of the
By the
few where
way,
we take the brand name.
yeah, that's right. That was smart, actually. I Question for you. I did notice in your conversation with Calvin, maybe organically and naturally, you started to, yes, you talked about Skyfall as his choice, but you also started to naturally talk about the antithesis movie,
Oh,
which I
yeah.
know is not your intent in your podcast journeys with all these people, but I did think about what he said, and I have to agree. I think some of his two choices was like A View to a Kill,
Mhm.
which I would agree with him. I think it's one of the least British movies for obviously the setting in the United States, which I don't think are exotic locations because I live in the United States. But I think the other one that he made mention, which I also have to agree with, is License to Kill. And it's less about the geography of Florida and Mexico and things like that, and much more about it just feels like an American Miami Vice movie.
Mm.
The way it's shot, the way it feels, the way it sounds, the way it looks. And I know that they embrace that to make it a little bit more palatable for the American audiences. And so that very decided decision to do that paid off in the sense of it does not feel like a British film.
Mm.
It doesn't have that British sense to it. And Bond, I sometimes forget that Timothy Dalton is British in that film. Like he doesn't, I don't feel like he has British sensibilities. He's sort of like a little bit more like die-hard John McClane in that movie.
A little too gritty.
A little too gritty, a little too, dare I say, American
Mm.
in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. And I'm happy to have a negative kind of definition of Britishness as well as a positive. There's what Britishness is and there's what it isn't, right? It's very, very
Exactly.
helpful.
Yeah.
Dare I ask, do you feel Never Say Never Again is a very British film?
I don't see that as a very British film, which is interesting because I do feel like Thunderball is a British film, and they're kind of to the left of each other. They're
Yeah.
close kissing cousins, but I feel like where Thunderball works very well with Bond's Britishness and how he conducts himself, even in a resort setting with tiny blue shorts. In Never Say Never Again, I just feel like it's so Kim Basinger. It's so like he's wearing gray sweats.
Hmm.
He's adopted those Americanisms that it throws me off a little bit.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an adjacent Bond film, so I was curious. And it is an American directed one, so it's Ivan Kershner, so
That's right. Ooh, Empire Strikes Back. Quack, quack.
had to bring that in. Okay. Okay, I think we've covered it for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that was it. I mean, the reality is I consider that a British film. Well, first of all, you got the literary roots. He's duty driven. He's emotionally restrained. He's incredibly, incredibly tied to institutions and traditions in the UK. And it just felt like this was the purest expression of Bond as a British officer first.
Mm.
He's a globe-trotting action hero second, but he's a British officer first. And I think putting British and Britishness first, I think that's why this wins hands down against any other film, even Skyfall, Calvin.
Brilliant. Hope to hear from him later. Thank you very much
we
for
will.
joining me.
Thank you, Thomas.